Hello, everybody, and welcome to Cinema Savvy. There's myself, George, bringing you another review. And of course, this is a new entry in the Steven Spielberg Retrospective. Of course, this is the post released in 2017, which is very recent. We're 3 films away from being up to date with the series. And this is one of the more different reviews. So you might be immediately wondering, it's just George by himself. It is today. Tom is meant to be joining us, but he's unfortunately not well. So wishing Tom well at home, which is a shame. He's been on most of these episodes in the series, but he will be involved in the top 10. So you will be seeing him again very soon. And it is unfortunately something we just couldn't delay because we've got so many things in the pipeline. We've got a pretty tight schedule. We're recording Ready Player One tomorrow. I'm very excited to show you who we've got on that. And I just can't wait to see what else we've got planned. So I'm going solo for this one. And I'm kind of excited to talk about the post because if I'm going to sort of get into it, this is only the second time I've seen the film since it came out of the cinema all those years ago. And I think it's going to be quite interesting to revisit, especially with the political spectrum that's come over the last 5 years. But before we get into any of that stuff, please do comment below with your thoughts on the post. Whether you like the film, whether you've seen it, whether you haven't, all your thoughts on it. If you think it's aged well, if you think it hasn't, please do comment them. And if you're a fan of Steven Spielberg, this is the place to be. So please do consider hitting the subscribe button. There's a lot more videos on the way, only four or five more now. I'll go over them at the end of the video as always. But yeah, we're in 2017 this year. It has absolutely flown by, and a few more videos before we do round out some things. And if you want to find out about some of our other videos, the non-Spielberg stuff, you can of course find out about this on our social medias. That is Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy, and we've got a link to Redbubble in the description where you can pick up some of our merch. But aside from that, talking the posts, of course, it is it's based off a real life event. It's about the Washington Post when they essentially, obviously, it's not watershed over here. It's set in 1971. It's all about the Vietnam stuff and beginning the expose that would eventually lead onto the Watergate scandal. And I'm going to say this a lot on other episodes in this series. If you are familiar with American politics, I'm English, if you didn't know already, or it's not obvious. So that's why it's a bit different for us. But we'll kickstart with the Imdb plot synopsis, which is an interesting one for this because I've just struggled to even talk about the basic plot there and there. And I rewatched it yesterday in the build-up to this. So the Imdb is as follows. A cover-up spanning 4 US presidents pushes the country's first female newspaper publisher and to editor to join an unprecedented battle between press and government. Said far better than I ever could. And an interesting observation on, I guess, the official synopsis, and we'll talk about some of those characters moving forward with this a little bit later on. But before we do, we're going to kickstart as we have with the series with a few of the other stuff. So I'm going back to the memories of the film now. I think there's a review up for this on the channel from when it came out in the UK at least a couple of years ago. I remember seeing this, I think, on its release date. This would have been, I'm going to say, spring 2018 here. Oscar films over here tend to be January, February time, so technically it would have been winter, actually not spring. But I definitely watched this film at the cinema. I don't know, I feel like the review was then. I don't know, I'm not going to find it, but I've seen it once, and this was the second time I had seen the film, and I think it's quite fair for me to say I really enjoyed seeing it again. Just as my initial thoughts, I loved it the first time round, and I thought, again, 5 years on, a lot has changed, age, the world, politics, knowledge, all that sort of stuff. It's really interesting to come to this film a couple of years later, and that's kind of a big thing for me, was looking at the context of when this film was made, how quick it was made, all that sort of stuff. I'm going to go into some behind the scenes, and there's a massive thing with Spielberg here where he was I don't want to say the word proven right, but he made a very interesting call that worked in his favor. And if I actually started getting to some of the behind the scenes for this film. So Amy Pascal, who's obviously head of Sony, she bidded for the screenplay and won that screenplay in 2016. So we're talking a pretty quick cycle for a company to pick up a screenplay in 2016, have it out by America. I think it was end of 2017 America. So as I said, early 2018 UK. And Spielberg was working on a film. I can't remember the name of said film, but there was a massive casting setback. This is whilst Ready Player One, I believe, has finished filming and is in post-production. And the opportunity came for him to do the post. And when he read the script for the post, he wanted to do it ASAP. Now, we're 32 episodes into the series now, and there's a lot of films where I can say, I think Tintin and Warhorse was a great one, where Tintin had such a long post-production that he did Warhorse in between. Obviously, the most famous one, Jurassic Park, Schindler's List. There are so many films of his where he has done this, where something's in post and he just does another film, which is, it's quite incomprehensible if I'm being honest. I don't know any of the directors that could do this. I don't know if others have, if they've done it well. I think Denis Villeneuve's always a surprise to the system, and he had about, I think, had 5 years where he had 5 films out in 5 years, which is pretty unheard of in modern day. But it's really interesting with this one that Spielberg came on board in early 2017. And in the space of 9 months, he wasn't just on board. This film was shot, edited, had post-production, and the final cut was done inside 9 months. That is unparalleled for film. And you've got to say, it's for it to be a feature-length film as well, and it to have the likes of Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep in, that is something that I'm just struggling to comprehend, it being done so quickly and at such a high quality. And I think with this as well, it is worth mentioning a big part of this. And I remember the marketing. This was the first time, obviously, Meryl Streep had been in a film with Spielberg directing it. And that was a massive part of the marketing feat. And it is quite surprising when you look at his career. As I said, 32 films in now. And it's the first time he's worked with Meryl Streep. And this isn't just any director. He's worked with the best of the best. He's worked with your Daniel Day-Lewis's, your Roy Schneiders. There's so many incredible actors, Richard Dreyfuss, that he's worked on over the decades, whether they've been young up-and-coming actors, whether they're Oscar winners, Mark Rylance as well. This is in the Mark Rylance sandwich, I call it. I'll speak more about that Ready Player One, but it's amazing that it took this long for Streep to be in the first film with him, and for Tom Hanks to come on board as well. And now they run with the whole vibe that it's the first time Streep, Hanks, and Spielberg have been on a film together. My question directly is it the first time Streep and Hanks have been in a film? There's probably something really obvious that's not coming to my head, so I'm not going to pretend that I have the answer for that. I don't. But it just goes to show the status that you can have on a film by having those names attached to it instantly. I'll talk box office later on, but that also very much surprised me in a really good way. And kind of giving my thoughts on the direction of this film, I think Spielberg's directed one hell of a film. One thing to take into account, again, you can open the political stuff, or you can open Vietnam. The film closes with newspapers being printed, and I think something I stand by, which I feel like I might have said before in the past, I don't know, but no director could make printing newspapers look interesting, but Steven Spielberg can. He can make that its own sequence, its own set piece, a John Williams score going with it. It's incredible that he's able to do that still after all these decades. And I think that's something that's jumped out to me more than anything else with this film. Not just newspapers being printed, but when it wants to be a drama as such, a lot of the film is people at tables talking around one another. You've got an incredible ensemble cast, but at no point it doesn't not feel like a Steven Spielberg film. And I think the audience is there, a very mature point to be able to accept a film like this. And I'm talking contextually now. When I mentioned that the film had that 9-month run, one of the reasons Spielberg won this film out was obviously in the era of fake news, the Donald Trump reign, and this is when you're really rewinding the clocks that, that election was November 2016. Brexit here was June 2016. And this was out by the end of 2017. I remember at the time, it was like calculated people like, oh, has he made a commentary on Trump or whatnot? But here we are 5 years later, and he absolutely has. The whole concept of the film is the freedom of the press. It's the ability to report the news in theory against corrupt governments, which is something we're very much a part of right now. I'm not going to go into specifics of those, but it's not hard to look at certain governments, especially over here when we seem to have a new government every couple of days. But I think, and that's where this Spielberg stuff comes from, that when he's making his blockbusters, and he enjoys making films like that, you can also see that he wants to use his status, maybe you could say his history, what he's been through, to make these more personal things. And I think he wanted a film to reflect the era that we were going to be living in, and he did that in one hell of a way. And I think that's something that's aged this film really well, is the sort of the real life events that transpired over the years that followed that. And again, especially when it has a lot of stuff with Nixon. And a really genius thing is in this film, if anyone watching at home, if you've seen it, obviously the audio of Nixon, it's not like an actor, like they're the original Nixon tapes that they've put the audio over the film. So when you get the shots of him out, in the White House, we're on the outside, it's a really smart way, I think, for them to bring those in. And I want to credit. I don't know how that would have worked. I'm guessing they're public domain. I'm guessing also Spielberg is Spielberg, so he can go out and get them if he wanted to. But it was really interesting to find out that's not something I thought would have been the case. I thought it would have been, an impersonator that can just do it, but it was the original one. And I also found out that a lot of the leaked documents in the film were also the original leaked documents, which surprised me even more. Just more the fact that they're still around like 50 years later and they're not in a museum, or the fact they're not, they look like normal bits of paper rather than classified documents that's been sealed away and it's not aged. So some really interesting real life stuff that goes in with this. But as I said, in terms of direction, I can't sit here and talk about it too much compared to some of his other films. I think it's got solid direction. As I said, I think it's an interesting project for him to have done. And I think the best thing I can say about the direction is the turnaround of having this film out at such a short amount of time with the actors it does, at the quality it is. Even your John Williams is coming on board and stuff like that. It's amazing that this was able to be made so quick. And obviously, it did qualify for that year's awards, and we'll go over that a little bit later on. But yeah, there's lots taken of this. And I think if we want to jumpstart some of the characters, I mentioned Meryl Streep, and this is where, again, playing real life events is always tough. But when you're bringing in some of the, two of the most famous actors in history, in Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks, and the characters that play him is Catherine Graham, who's of course the owner as well of the paper, the Washington Post, and she's a publisher alongside that. And you've got Tom Hanks as well, who is obviously one of the editors. Now they're playing real life people, so I'm not here to discredit any of that. Obviously, everyone in this film is based off real life, essentially. But when you're bringing in these actors that we've spent decades of our life with that we know, it's hard to look past calling them character names and thinking that, okay, it's Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks, and even Bob Odenkirk, who's got a massive role in this, who I absolutely love. It's hard to not just think about Breaking Bad and so, which is a credit again to their careers. And I guess it could also be me looking at it from a perspective of American history, American politics isn't something I'd be as familiar with now compared to then. It was 71. I wasn't born for a start, and a load of other things like that. So, if I'm going to talk about the cast, I'm going to say they're fine. I'm actually going to get to the Oscars later because I know Meryl Streep was nominated, but I can't fault the performances in the film. As I said, it comes down to Spielberg being involved, that he is this director that can get the names on board. But at no point do I ever feel like the cast aren't there. It feels like they exist. And the reason I say it is because they're two unbelievable actors in leading roles. But I don't feel they ever get the material to really push on from what we've seen of them in the past. Now, I'm not just going to sit here and say they were bad. They weren't at all. But it's something where there's no scene to me personally where they get the chance to act. They get the chance to be involved or show them at their best. And I think that's down to maybe their careers, what they've done for the decades. But also, aside from that, it's down to the story of this is that this doesn't require them to go out leaps and bounds. It's a very stoic performance by the pair of them. And I just think they're fine in that respect, that no one's been miscast. But the source material they're dealing with, I don't think is the best to really explore their ability. Now, one of the supporting actors I really want to talk about is Bob Odenkirk. I mentioned previously, he's playing Ben Bagdikin, who I thought was the best person in this film. And I think the reason for that is that we get to see Bob Odenkirk doing some of the things he does best. It's that, not sleaziness, but with this, he has the material where, he's going to get the records. He's the one going out on the trips. We get to see not the funny side to him, but we get to see that sleazier side, or he knows that he has these national secrets, and him uncovering the story, to me at least, is so much more interesting than somebody else from anywhere trying to just publish a newspaper. I don't think, again, the source material is there for the others, but for Bob Odenkirk, it's just great to see him in a Spielberg film. And some of the names in this as well. Alison Brie pops up for a minute. We get Jesse Plemons that turns up, who, obviously has a history with Bob Odenkirk because of Breaking Bad, which was really funny for me to be viewing at least. But there's so many people turn up. David Cross as well. Obviously, most of them were always known as Tobias Fimke, but it really goes to show that with these sort of historical dramas, that people will be on board. And I think when it's Spielberg, there's no actor that isn't going to pick up the phone when the the chance comes to do this, and that's kind of what I said, that this is the first Meryl Streep Steven Spielberg film, and it does work to both of their advantage. So yeah, I can't talk too much about the characters. As I said, doing this review solo is a bit different to normal. At least there'll be a back and forth. There'll be a chance for someone to point something I might not have spotted for myself. And it'll be interesting to get a back and forth. But as I said, we are pressed at the moment with so much stuff in the pipeline. But moving on from the cast, I'm going to talk about John Williams and his score because, of course, he did the BFG from the last episode on the series. And we thought it was fine. And kind of the same with The Post. I think for me, the biggest thing with The Post is I remember that John Williams actually scored the film, which surprised me. I know at the time he's obviously working on the Star Wars stuff as well. And with how short the production time was for this, he actually dropped out of Ready Player One to score The Post, which I'm kind of devastated by because I think John Williams would have been much better for Ready Player One. Not to fault the score we did end up getting, which we'll talk about next week, which is a great score in its own right. But I think Ready Player One would have been a film that just perfectly suited what John Williams could have done as a composer. Again, not to discredit who else has been in it. And I guess, at this point in time, he's in his mid-80s. He's slowing down. He's not doing as many films, and it's probably easier for him to come on and score something like The Post that probably doesn't require as much grandiose stuff. That I mentioned again, the newspaper printing scene. That's probably the most intense the score gets, and it's more of that sort of John Williams whimsical, going by tone rather than something being dour or dark or needing different things. It's a very simple score, and I think for me it's just, as we're further into the series, it's just about looking back on his relationship with Steven Spielberg now, and for those two to still be doing stuff together at the age of John Williams is just amazing, and it's really cool. And I think when we get forward to a couple more, the Fabelmans, of course John Williams wasn't involved with West Side Story, he wasn't involved with Ready Player One, so this is the last John Williams score until the Fabelmans comes out, which obviously UK-wise is going to be January. That's going to be a massive part of that discussion. Again, having those two coming back together, John Williams in his 90s, that's quite a feat. But yeah, this is the most recent, I guess we could say, John Williams Spielberg score, and listen, it does have one great song, and I think it's called the Running the Press or something, which is that montage I mentioned prior. But another really cool bit about the soundtrack was this is the first ever film Spielberg has made in which he went to a scoring session without ever hearing a beat of the score before. Now, you can observe that how you will. Does that mean that the score was done quicker? Does that mean it was more last minute? I don't know. But again, if we're going off that premise that this was 9 months from script to release, that score must have been done very quick. And again, for John Williams to do that, I think it's amazing. And yeah, it's something nice to talk about with it, I guess. And kind of following on with the music side of things, we also have the legacy of the film, and this is really tricky to talk about as we do enter, as we get nearer to where we are today. This is 2017, and late 2017 this film came out. How do we look at a legacy from a film from 5 years ago? Certainly this is one I say that people aren't talking about. I don't mean it in a disrespectful term. I think it's one of those films that after its Oscar season, not many speak about it after. I think those that have seen it probably don't have an issue with it. I think a lot of people will like it. A lot of people enjoy it. I think with it being a political film of the year it's from, that's probably a turn off to a lot of people these days. Not an issue for me directly. But again, if you're watching this for the performances, you've got Streep, you've got Tom Hanks. If you're watching for the director, you've got Spielberg. You're watching for the composer, you've got John Williams. It's really interesting that this isn't something spoken about too much. And I would also follow it up saying that Ready Player One, which 2018, March 2018, a couple of months after, is one of his highest grossing films. And I think that's also a reason why people don't speak about The Post as much. And with its numbers, this is what really surprised me. It grossed 180 million worldwide at the box office, and it's only on a budget of 50 mil. I think what's surprising for me isn't the 50 mil budget, but in turn, it grossing $180 million. I think, again, because we're post-COVID now, dramas aren't making as much. They're not getting cinema releases. People aren't flocking to them. Certain demographics aren't back at the cinemas. This obviously came out today, it wouldn't be making 180 mil, but I think it's that sort of polite reminder of, how much money films were making pre-COVID, how many people were going to the cinemas, and it's really interesting to see that in this. And I guess as well, the combo of Streep, Hanks, and Spielberg is something that a lot of people would have probably been pulled towards seeing at the cinema. Couldn't tell you what else came out in November 2017. just off the top of my head, struggling. I know December was, of course, Last Jedi, Jumanji, was a Great Showman when Rogue One came out. I can't remember, but yeah, it's an interesting one. And even talking about its legacy for the all season, this was nominated for 2 Oscars. One was Best Film and one was for Best Actress for Meryl Streep. Now, if I'm going to be honest, I don't think Meryl Streep was anywhere near worthy of an Oscar nomination for this film. Even looking at the film she was up against, she had Frances McDormand in 3 Billboards, Sally Hawkins' Shape of Water, Margot Robbie in I, Tonya, Saoirse Ronan in Lady Bird. All 4 of those are far superior to this performance, and this is that very typical social media snarky comment of she gets nominated for being Meryl Streep and being in a film that can be nominated at the Oscars. This is definitely one of those that falls victim to it. And its other nomination being Best Film, I don't actually have a problem with that. Obviously, I'm quite biased. That's the year 3 Billboards to me should have won. Ironically, we've actually recently had a new Martin McDonagh film out on the channel. You can check out our Banshees of Inisherin review, actually, if you're a fan of his. Absolutely love that, and I hope we're not in a similar situation next year for some terrible films that come out at the same time. But 27, this was an incredible Oscar year. You had Dunkirk, Get Out, Lady Bird, Phantom Thread, The Post, 3 Billboards, Shape of Water, Call Me By Your Name, and Darkest Hour. I can remember that clearly. I think we even did live streams for this, as we always do. And yeah, this was never in the conversation to win, but I can certainly see why it was nominated. I think the quality is there, and I guess at the time the political environment probably pushed Oscar voters to go for it. And as I said, it's got Meryl Streep, it's got Tom Hanks, it's got Steven Spielberg. That is going to be enough for them to get an easy nomination, and a nomination that will never transfer into an Oscar win. So that's his legacy in that respect. And as I kind of move on to now, say, how is it perceived today? The question is, I've not seen people speak about this film for a few years. And I think because it's harder with it being so recent still, that when the conversation comes up, I'm sure people will probably discuss it. I think some people like the film. Not everybody, of course, will like this film, but it is one where I do think it has a good reputation. It is just, again, not forgotten like the BFG. Ironically, this box office is, much better. So all that talk of Spielberg doing a bomb with the BFG is his career over. Post would obviously prove that wrong literally a year later. Especially Ready Player One the following that. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I enjoy it on a second viewing. I thought it was fine. And as I said, the last 5 years have been quite something in terms of politics. So it was nice to go back to something that's set in the 70s. And it kind of makes me miss these films where at the moment we're getting a lot of political TV shows or real life stuff within a year or two of them happening. And it does make me think that when you've got a film, coming out 40, 50 years after the events happen, it's much easier for them to do. You've had time. We know what's happened in reality, what's followed them, and it never feels as rushed. It feels like this was a story that they wanted to tell, and it was as simple as them telling it. And I've not got a problem with that. I don't think it was a studio vying for money. I don't think it's a studio vying for Oscars. I think this is a conscious filmmaking choice from Steven Spielberg, the actors he's brought on board, and the rest of the writers as well. So, the funny fact as well, the writer for this film also wrote Spotlight, which I think won the Oscar either the year before or 2 years before. So, I would imagine that's one of the reasons this was also picked up very quickly by Amy Pascal, which is also understandable when you're looking at the business side of things. So I think that's going to do it for my review of The Post. As I said, very different entry for the Steven Spielberg Retrospective. We normally have a guest, and as I said, we are wishing Tom well for when he is better, and we will have him in the top 10 video, which is very exciting. And kind of bringing up that top 10 video, we can talk about what is also coming down the line. So before we get into that sort of thing, please do comment below with your thoughts on The Post. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this review. If you haven't, just let us know your thoughts. We'll be interested to hear them on this film. And obviously, as I said, there's a fair few things coming up. The next big one is going to be Ready Player One, coming Tuesday, the 8th of November. I'm going to be joined by Charlie and Reese on that one as we get to one of the penultimate entries before we get to those new releases. I can't wait to revisit the film. It's been a while since I've seen it, and it's a film I've got some really, really great memories of, and I'm excited to be able to talk about that. And obviously, if anyone knows Charlie, they'll know she's a massive fan of that film as well. So that should be a good one. But aside from that, we've got a lot of other Spielberg films coming up. So I mentioned Ready Player One. We've also got West Side Story coming the 15th of November. We've then got Steven Spielberg's Top 10 ranking, a video we are working on behind the scenes, like our other ranking videos, which I do recommend you checking out in advance, like Bond, MCU, Star Wars. We have a lot of guests that you have seen across the series send videos in, submit their videos, and then we collect them all together to make one giant score. So that's going to go up on the 22nd of November. and that is the day before the Fabelmans comes out in America. Fabelmans comes out on the 23rd, which I think is Thanksgiving weekend. And the reason it's a TBC for us is because we don't have a date. The UK, it's going to be the end of January. Obviously, there's no early screenings this side of the pond. It wasn't put at the festival, so there's been no way for us to have seen this early unless we could fly to America, which we definitely can't do, unless someone wants to be very gracious with their spare amount of money. But yes, we will have a review out for that when we can in January of next year. Hopefully earlier. Again, we do not know. It will be great to see. Yeah, we're always very excited when we get these early screenings, and I'll also bring once more the thumbnail for the top 10 Spielberg films. So if you have a look at the screen now, if you are watching, there is a coalition there of every single Spielberg film from the series so far. Everything that's going to have its own review is on there to some capacity, whether it's a small image or a big one. These are all stills from the film. It was fun actually to make this edit and get these photos together, but that is the massive ranking video that's going to cap the series. And hopefully you will agree with it. There might be some things you disagree with. There might be some things you do agree with, and we'll be excited to hear your rankings as well. So please do get involved when that video does go up on the 22nd. And aside from that, there's a lot of other things happening on the channel. We have Andor weekly discussions. We've got, some more TV that's been coming out. We've had House of Dragon reviews. We've got new releases. We've got All Quiet on the Western Front. There's been so many things coming out. The best way to find out about videos is sticking with us and following us on our social medias, Twitter and Instagram at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinemasavvy, a link to Redbubble in the description below, a place where you can pick up some of our merch, which is always appreciated when people do. It does help support the channel. It helps us fund this sort of stuff and keep the channel going, which we are always very grateful for. So if you do enjoy that, thank you as always for getting involved. And to anyone watching at home today, thank you for taking time out of the day to watch this video, to join us. I hope you enjoyed the post. I hope you've enjoyed the review. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one. Take care, and we'll see you then.